From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is AgDay.
Coming up on AgDay.
And when I heard of the situation in Nebraska, I thought, I've got what they need.
How one farmer came to the aid of those in need in the flood zone.
I'm Betsy Gibbon. How are Nebraska livestock producers recovering after the flood? We have the story ahead of the show.
As rain continues to bring with it more problems, many producers wondering when they'll be able to start planting.
AgDay, presented by the all-new Chevy Silverado, the strongest, most advanced Silverado ever.
Good morning, I'm Clinton Griffiths. The wet weather continuing to cause problems for producers hoping to get out in their fields, and more rounds of soaking rain on already saturated ground is making the situation worse in the plains. Take a look at Davenport, Iowa. Crews evacuated people from several buildings and cars after a flood barrier failed along the Mississippi River. The breach hitting as communities in Iowa, Illinois, and Missouri prepare for record or near record crests along the river. While producers haven't seen the extensive flooding that we saw back in March, it has remained wet and at times cool. As a result, we have excess soil moisture across the vast majority of the Midwest.
We actually saw nearly 2/3 of the corn planted during the first full 3 weeks of May, and almost 2/3 of the soybeans planted during the last full 3 weeks of May. That may not happen as quickly this year because looking ahead for the next 2 weeks, it does look like a very wet pattern and sometimes cool across the Midwest, and that is likely to lead to an even slower start to widespread planting than what we saw last year when we did finally get it done in May.
Tyne Morgan joining us now from the studio in Kansas City. Tyne, here we are in May and wet weather continues to be a pretty big topic of conversation.
Well, Clinton, as you know, it just won't quit raining in some areas. And now the relentless rains will force some farmers to plant more soybeans. And, and as a farmer told me earlier this week, he just can't get fired up to plant $7 soybeans right now. And in talking with Standard Grain's Joe Vaklovic, we may not even be seeing the worst of soybean prices yet.
The last thing that the soybean market really needs here in the U.S. is more acreage. We've got all the supply that we can handle at this point. Soybean carryout is expected to double year over year. When analysts go out into the 1920 marketing year, things could get even worse. If we end up with the trendline yield this coming growing season, I think you could find a carryout that goes from, say, 900 million this year up to well over $1 billion next year.
Well, Clinton, Vaklovic told me if the worst case scenario does play out, if we see more soybean acres, there's no deal with China while South American soybean supplies just continue to grow, you can't rule out the possibility of soybean prices in the $6 range.
Holy cow. Now, Tyne, we'll talk more about China and trade here in just a moment, but your area there near Kansas City was expected to see a lot of rain this week. How does it look around there?
Yeah, and that's exactly what we saw in 2 days, more than 4 inches of rain. So water just standing in fields, roads closed, and that will force some farmers who can't get in the field for at least a few more weeks to plant more soybeans. But as you saw on the show Tuesday morning, there are some farmers who finished up planting corn actually on Sunday. But in talking with local seed representatives, right now they're just trying to get a handle of how many replant acres they'll see in this area this year.
All right, thanks, Tyne. Appreciate it. Meteorologist Cindy Clausen's been tracking storms all week. Cindy, how much more rain is in the forecast?
Well, Clinton, still quite a bit, especially down in the southern plains, getting into the south central part of the country. Look at our map, though. Our precipitation estimate is showing this is first the past 24 hours, and you could see a lot of that has been down into parts of Texas and Arkansas, Oklahoma, a secondary area a little bit further north, Kansas, into northern Missouri and northern Illinois. You could see some of that streaming up into Ohio as well. Now, adding on the next 24 hours, we're going to see a fair amount of rain filling in, especially in the eastern part of Texas into Louisiana and Arkansas. That'll be where we see the heaviest rain, but you could see we're going to see rain all through much of the nation's midsection and on into the northeast as well. So this is not done by any stretch of the imagination. And heading over to our crop comments, sunshine a few days ago in Kansas as a train was loaded with sorghum. The U.S. Grains Council sharing this video on a sunny day. The train bound for Corpus Christi, Texas. Now, the organization says a couple of months ago, a shuttle train with sorghum was shipped to Mexico. Well, coming up in just a few minutes, we'll take a look at your national forecast and see how long this rain may be lasting. Clinton?
Nebraska is working to overcome multiple floods this spring. While some livestock producers are now recovering, rebuilding will take a while. AgDay's Betsy Gibbons shows us the damage near the Platte River in North Bend, Nebraska.
That's really the hard part, is just trying to figure out which way to go.
Greg Beebe considers himself fortunate after the Platte River flooded over its banks and onto his farm.
We didn't lose any livestock. The feed resources that we had were contaminated, and so we had to have discarded most of that.
The cattle okay as the water went down.
They just kind of waited it out. There was feed in the feeders, and they kind of stood in water to eat, but they were able to stay put, and quickly the water went back down.
Yet the mess may follow into the summer. Uneven ground and fields turn to sand. Forage lost as Beebe tries to makeshift his own with cover crops.
We have some going, and we'll use some of that crop ground just as temporary pasture to get us through this process. It's going to replace our typical pasture situation. A lot of that has silt on it, and it won't be productive as pasture, so it needs to be replaced just to be profitable.
Livestock producers say while forage is an issue, rebuilding fence will be a large problem.
We're looking at a little over 7 miles of fence that's going to be full reconstruction.
Time and money added to many producers' budgets.
Well, this is going to be painful. A lot of people are, producing at break even or below, plus or minus. So it's a tough time.
While everything can be fixed with time, Beebe wants the river to stay put for much longer. Reporting in North Bend, Nebraska, I'm Betsy Gibbons.
U.S. trade negotiators are returning to the U.S. after another round of trade talks with their Chinese counterparts in Beijing. One report says President Trump has dropped a central demand with China that it stop alleged instances of commercial cyber theft. A Chinese official says Beijing has complied in full with a September 2015 agreement that neither government would engage in or knowingly support online theft of intellectual property.
I really think there's only a few things that remain to be done, and the primary one is the tariffs. How many should remain, and what system will take place to reduce them, if not eliminate them. That probably can be handled in talks next week.
China's Vice Premier Liu He, who heads the Chinese president negotiating team, is scheduled to arrive in Washington on Sunday. They will be in the U.S. for 5 or 6 days, aimed at sealing a final deal. The EPA reaffirming that glyphosate is safe for users. The EPA's draft findings come after 2 recent court verdicts awarded multi-million-dollar claims to men who blamed glyphosate for their lymphoma. Now, glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup. Bayer, which acquired Roundup maker Monsanto last year, has reported U.S. lawsuits from 13,400 people over exposure to that weed killer. The EPA's draft findings in a periodic review conclude that glyphosate is not likely to be carcinogenic to humans. When we come back, we'll continue our discussion about planting pace and the potential market impacts. And later, as folks in Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri are still trying to dig out from that recent flooding, we'll see how big hearts in Kentucky are helping. The Federal Reserve leaving its key interest rate unchanged. It signaled that no rate hikes are likely in coming months amid signs of renewed economic health but unusually low inflation. July corn futures rose to their highest level since April 22nd as soybeans continued to sink, testing lows not seen since 2008. Here's an update from the CME.
Today in the grain market, soybeans really took a dive lower. The trade war just continues, and it's absolutely stepping on the neck of those futures. Tariff fatigue is really decimating prices, and the longer it goes on, the more bearish the sentiment becomes. As you see, the market started out just a couple of cents lower, and then it just pressed and pressed. there really seems to be no end in sight, especially with the idea that we would have a big crop. And I think everybody's just shrugging off the fact that we've had some bad weather here. Now, corn was a little bit higher, and that bullish momentum is really starting to grow. It's interesting that it's just the opposite of soybeans. That positive grain inspection and the good crop progress report on Monday really is underpinning the bump here. And it certainly looks like a little bit of this wet delay might be part of the actionable buying going on in corn, but it's also because it's been very depressed for quite a while, so we're seeing the market move up.
Brian Doherty, Stuart Peterson, our guests here at the Agribusiness Desk today. Brian, let's talk about this planting pace because we continue to debate whether it matters or doesn't matter. What does history tell us about, our ability to get this done?
Yeah, it tells us different things. The last 4 crops that were planted late as of the second week of May, they did pretty well. One was trend line, the other 3 were above trend line yield. Okay. So the market's kind of real suspicious to worry about planting delays because in recent history, it hasn't seemed to matter much. Now, I am of the opinion, I think many people are, there was a little bit of luck with that too, that you had really good weather that carried the season out, you had late falls, and maybe that's all part of this global warming and climate change. On the other hand, it might just be that we had really good years. So if I'm an end user in particular, I'm not betting on that. I'm really watching this very, very carefully to secure my inventories.
Yeah. From an end user perspective, and we do talk a lot from the grower perspective, grain grower perspective, but from the end user perspective, there are real opportunities here to take advantage of.
There are. As an end user, what you want to look at, I think, is value. Same thing for a producer. If prices are higher, look at the value proposition, and then look at it at the markets and ask yourself, realistically, do I really expect them to get a lot lower? So my point is, how much risk am I willing to take to do nothing? Doing nothing pays dividends to a point, and then it doesn't. And when you look at corn, you look at this old crop corn nudging under $3.50 this week. The worst price we've seen is somewhere just above $3. So maybe in the worst case scenario, somewhere down the road, there could be a drop to $3.10 or $3.20. Most of the time, the lows have come in probably just under $3.50 and above $3.30 in the last half a decade. So we're right down there. Don't get greedy waiting for the last 4 or 5%. Start buying now, and if it gets cheaper, buy more.
There you go. All right. Well, always appreciate the perspective. Thank you, and we'll be back with more Ag Day here in just a minute.
To discuss marketing strategies, call 800-334-9779 or visit stuartpeterson.com. Closed captioning is brought to you by BASF. Grow smart with BASF. We create chemistry.
Welcome back to Ag Day. Meteorologist Cindy Clausen looking at this rain right here in the middle of the country. And again, more rain building back, not just for today, but for several more days.
Exactly. This has been just kind of a long system, kind of just low pressure after low pressure riding along this front. And we're not quite done with it just yet. Let's take a look. Yeah, over the past several days, we've had low pressure after low pressure riding along this front, and we'll continue to see that today. But end may be in sight, at least for the western part of this. Putting this into motion, you can see everything moves to the east. You've got the main low here that's going into the Great Lakes area. Obviously, we've got this cold front on the back side of that, so showers and thunderstorms all along that, but rain moving into the mid-Atlantic states there as well. Now, high pressure will give folks, at least in the northern fringe of this, a little bit of a break as we get into Thursday and then eventually Friday as we get towards the Great Lakes. Now, a lot of western areas will be staying dry over the next couple of days, but we will start to see another system coming into the northern high plains and northern plains. Into the overnight hours we go. Low pressure moves over to the eastern parts of the lakes. We'll still see showers and thunderstorms along the cold front, even into parts of the central plains. For Friday, we're going to be seeing that high pressure moving into the Great Lakes, so a little bit of time to dry out, but probably not enough for a lot of producers to be getting any real work done. You could see that low pressure now over the northeast, but we're going to see showers and thunderstorms through a lot of the southeastern and south central part of the country, and there's that secondary front now moving into the upper Midwest. We already showed you the precipitation. There are still a few areas that are seeing a little snowfall, mainly in those higher elevations and just in our far northern reaches right on the U.S. U.S.-Canadian border. Temperature-wise, we're seeing 50s and 60s across a lot of the areas along the front and behind it. The warmer 70s and 80s out in front of it. Some 40s, though, remaining up towards the Great Lakes. Overnight, we're going to be seeing those low temperatures getting down into the 30s and 40s, and much of the northern tier of states, some very mild 60s and 70s down in our southern parts of the country. Heading into tomorrow, we'll be seeing 70s and 80s once again. Very similar temperatures. Some folks will cool down a little bit where you're seeing some rain. Jet stream forecast shows that trough in the western part of the country. That's going to translate to the east, but watch what happens. We get a little bit of a cutoff going on. We'll see that in the southwest, but we also have a little one bringing some cooler temperatures and some stormy weather to the northeast as well as we get into next week. That's a look at your national forecast. Now let's check on the weather where you live. Annabella, Utah, sunny and warmer for you today with a high of 63 degrees. Seymour, Indiana, showers likely, maybe a few rumbles of thunder with a high of 77. Johnstown, Pennsylvania, showers and thunderstorms.
Bacon, it's often called the gateway meat. Well, up next, we'll see how it helped a major food company boost sales. And later, a change in circumstances leading a Kentucky woman to offer a helping hand for ranchers impacted by flooding. That story in the country.
Drover's Report is sponsored by Corteva Agriscience, Agriculture Division of Dow DuPont, your partner in range and pasture productivity.
May is beef month. It's also the time we begin to see increasing supplies of market-ready cattle, seasonally the largest supplies of the year from now through June, just in time for grilling season.
At this time of year, we expect to see a good demand for beef, but with retail prices increasing throughout the year so far, the question is, will retailers be able to maintain those prices? Are they going to have to lower prices to entice traffic into the stores?
Henderson says beef demand continues to be good and it does generate store traffic, but retailers have raised prices all year to cover higher wholesale prices. An update to a story we told you about a few weeks ago. McDonald's releasing the results of its recent bacon promotion. That, along with new menu items, value meals, and redesigned restaurants, helping lift same-store sales for the first time in 4 quarters. The CEO says work it started 3 years ago is finally starting to pay off. Now, McDonald's same-store sales rose 4.5%. The company forecasts commodity prices to rise between 2 and 3% in 2019. The floodwaters may have receded in Nebraska, but the need for help remains. Coming up, one rancher's generous donation that will make a difference in the country.
In the Country is powered by Kawasaki. Let the good times roll.
Help is coming from all over the country for Nebraska farmers devastated by historic flooding earlier this year. In Kentucky, there's a statewide effort to donate rolls of hay, feed, fencing supplies, and other necessities organized by Kentucky Extension agents and one passionate farmer. Jeff Franklin with the University of Kentucky has her story.
Frida Smith in Owen County has a lot of grass to mow and a lot of land to take care of at her Smith Farms home in Owenton.
I'm in a unique position because my husband recently passed away and we had to dispose of our cattle.
Smith and her husband David of 48 years were beef cattle producers with as many as 125 head on their farm. She sold the last cows in January.
And so after those cows were gone, I had 500 to 600 rolls of hay and no cattle to eat it. And when I heard of the situation in Nebraska, I thought, I've got what they need and we should come up with a way to get what I have to them to help them out.
Frida then got in touch with new Owen County Agricultural Extension agent Kendall Bowman, who had only been on the job a few short weeks, about donating her hay to Midwest farmers in need.
She called me up and said she seen on the news what was going on in Nebraska and wants to help them out. Said she had several loads of hay that she wanted to donate. Was asking how I could help her get it out there. So I called my district boss and made some phone calls, and next thing I know, we decided to do a statewide drive. That way we could have several loads going out there.
Extension districts in counties all across Kentucky like Owen County have been accepting donations of hay and other supplies to send to Midwest states.
And I understand the troubles and the trials that farmers go through. Everybody needs help sometime. And if you don't blink, you need help at some point, then we're in denial. So we understand, we've been blessed, so we'll just pass it on.
This is a community that loves to help people, and so they were willing to help other counties that are in need out in Nebraska.
Very positive and contagious. You know, it's been spreading. You know, it's a great thing.
And the whole thing started with one lady, Frida
How's that make
Smith,
you feel to know that
wanting
people
to help
across the state are
farmers in
working
need.
on this?
Makes me feel proud to be a Kentuckian and associated with agriculture.
From the University of Kentucky College of Agriculture, Food and Environment, I'm Jeff Franklin reporting.
All right, thanks, Jeff. And that's all the time we have this morning. We're sure glad you tuned in, spent part of your day with us. From all of us here at AgDay, have a great day out in farm country.